Morning, everybody. I'm Tom Kennedy, and I think most of you know me, but I'm a member of St. John's and also a volunteer with the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. This moral fusion movement is working to address the interlocking injustices that trap so many people in poverty today. Our movement is a continuation of the vision that was first articulated by Dr. Martin Luther King shortly before his death as a response to the economic and political inequities of the 1960s. And that unfortunately, those inequities continue to persist today. And that's why we're have the movement that we do. From our religious teachings, we know that many of the Old Testament prophets spoke to the need to be mindful of the most vulnerable in society, and that in Matthew chapter 5, verse 40, Jesus makes clear in the parable of the sheep and the goats that we have obligations to each other that are seen by God. Quoting, "The king will reply, truly I tell you, whatever you did to the least of the brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me." That anchors us, I think, in the Poor People's Campaign. We are speaking to change the political narrative of this country so that the inequities that are persisting right now are fully addressed. I'm delighted to present Mike Puskar and Linnell Fall, who are our tri-chairs for the Maryland Poor People's Campaign. They work with me every week, and we are really fortunate to have them as leaders because they both, along with me, have had experience with in interlocking injustices, and we'll explain all about that in a minute. But their work as poverty abolitionists is central to our movement. We normally begin our movement meetings with song and value theomusicology as a means of inspiring us and having us be excited about the social justice movement. So I'm going to ask Linnell's granddaughter, Journey, to lead us in song now, just to give you a sense of how that all goes.
And if you would like to stand and join me in singing.
Everybody's got a right to live. Everybody's got a right to live. We say poverty no more. We want justice for the poor. Everybody's got a right to live. Everybody's got a right to live. Everybody's got a right to dream. Everybody's got a right to love. Everybody's got a right to live. Everybody's got a right to live. We say poverty no more. We want justice for the poor. Everybody's got a right to live. Everybody's got a right to vote. Everybody's got a right to health. Everybody's got a right to housing. Everybody's got a right to live.
Thank you. I'll turn it over to Mike initially for a couple of comments, and then to Linnell. Oh, okay, go ahead.
Just, we will have a Q&A at the end of the program, so you know you can, if you want to stay for that part. No. So, Linnell?
Good morning, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be invited here to speak. I am so grateful for those who attended our March 2nd event. It was really powerful. We had over 100 people sign up to attend the rally in Annapolis. There was a lot of energy. It rained all day. It stopped at 2. We just peeled papers back and kept speaking and kept going forward because a lot of people had a lot to say about injustice in our land, in our counties, in our states. in this country. This nation is predicated on racism, even before the founding of this nation. The Poor People's Campaign views racism as one of the interlocking injustices that creates, justifies, and deepens poverty for everyone. Racism constricts our hopes, our dreams, our ability to imagine, and much more just, humane in a multicultural society. Dr. King organized the Poor People's Campaign, December of 1967. His wife actually introduced him to this information and urged him to take this mantle public. Children and women were dying, and men across this country from starvation. My Shiro, Fannie Lou Hamer's daughter, died of malnutrition. There were people dying of malnutrition in the United States of America in the 1960s, 50s. White, Black, all ethnicities. And it was a crisis. And we had, our leaders cried out, churches cried out, but our national leaders ignored those cries. So they decided there's going to be a protest in Washington, D.C. There's going to be one-day march to trek across the Capitol in jalopies, horse and wagons, whatever, walking, however they could get there. And it was activated due to the deaths in Mississippi and the hangings and the lynchings. There were 3 civil rights leaders who were locked up and 1 volunteer who was white. They were let out of jail. They were beaten with chains, and they were let out of jail in the middle of the night, and they were beaten with chains, and they were shot. This sparked so much, it was just so explosive that Dr. King and everyone just said, we've got to work on getting support from the United States government to protect those in Mississippi. Mississippi was had no protection whatsoever, and things were going really, really, really bad for the people there. And so 3 years earlier, President Lyndon Baines Johnson declared war on poverty. 19% of the Americans, and an estimated 35 million, live below the poverty level. Dr. King planned an initial group of 2,000 to demand jobs, minimum wage, education for the poor and for children to improve their self-image. The NAACP leader, Marian Wright, and the Legal Defense of Educational Fund in Jackson, Mississippi, where Dr. King started the next chapter of struggle for genuine equality. The struggles for genuine equality and desegregation and the right to vote are essential. Dr. King believed that African Americans and other minorities would never have full citizenship until they had economic security. Through a nonviolent direct action, King and the SCLC, which is the Southern Christian Leadership, hope to focus on the nation's attention to economic inequality, poverty, because the highest focus in the nation's attention of planning, the planning of the early and the beginning of the cooperation, the SCLC thought that Dr. King's plan was just too far, it stretched too far. And Dr. King said, if we stretch as far as we can see, if we give them enough options about what needs to take place in this country, maybe we'll get some of it back. Maybe they will pay attention and give us some of this. Because to go there and not have demands and not have a list of demands of ongoing poverty and injustice, it's just not right, he said. Unfortunately, Dr. King was assassinated in April of 1968. Reverend Abernathy became the leader. And less than, I guess, maybe I'm going to say 25 days, Mrs. Coretta Scott King had to lead this march to Washington because they decided to have that march. And here's a widow stricken with grief, immobilizing thousands of women, and they did it on Mother's Day, May 12, 1968. Mrs. Kennedy was there to greet them when they arrived at the Capitol. They stayed and created Resurrection City, and they were there for 47 days. They were evicted. They were thrown out because their permit was over with the next day, so they had to leave. And the actions that took place and what they did not receive was very heartbreaking, because the only thing that they received was maybe in 200 counties, they were able to get free food. There was some optional issues, optional jobs given to state workers or local workers for poor people, immobilizing the poor and being paid for it. They were very, very disappointed. A lot of civil rights leaders stood up, talked about it. Dr. King, fortunately, after speaking against Vietnam 4 days later, he was assassinated. And let me go on to say that the campaign was revised by our leader, Reverend Dr. William J. Barber II and Reverend Dr. Theo Liz Harris. They are the co-chairs for the Poor People's Campaign, a moral revival and a national call for moral revival, addressing the 5 interlocking injustices, which is systemic racism, poverty, ecological devastation, the denial of health care, and the false moral narrative of religious nationalism. Drawing on a history of a moral fusion movement, the Poor People's Campaign is made up of 40 state coordinating committees, over 400 partner organizations, and thousands of religious leaders, bringing together the nation's 140 million poor and low-income people across race, ability, religion, gender, sexual orientation, region, and issue, alongside faith leaders, organized laborers, advocates, activists, and other people of conscience. The Poor People's Campaign seeks to address these injustices and revive the heart and soul of our democracy with an agenda rooted in the needs of the priorities of 140 million, as well as our deepest constitutional moral values. Any nation that ignores nearly half of its citizens is in a moral, economic, and political crisis. There were 140 million poor people who were poor or one emergency away from economic ruin before the pandemic. Since March of 2020, while hundreds and thousands of people have died, millions are on the edge of hunger, eviction, and still without health care or living wage. Billionaire wealth has grown by the trillions. Thank you.
All right, so Mike couldn't find the mic there. Thank you, Linnell. So Linnell touched upon the 5 interlocking injustices briefly. I just want to go into them a little bit more. So they are also known as the interlocking evils because they are truly evil. To let these things occur and stay and be around for decades and centuries, it's just not right. Especially when the civil rights movement was started, about 60 years ago. And like she was explaining, Dr. King and the others began addressing these issues, and they're still here today, if not even worse today. So the first injustice is systemic poverty. And the Poor People's Campaign in its name addresses that poverty is the overall issue. But it can't stand alone. These other injustices, they're interlocking because they all tie together in one way or another. You can't address one without addressing the other. You can't suffer from one without suffering from another. And so the Poor People's Campaign National Call for Moral Revival is a movement. It's not really an organization, it's a movement. And it calls all organizations together to come out of their silos. If you have one organization working on climate change, one organization working on racism, and so on, they all have to come together and address all these issues together. So after systemic poverty, there's systemic racism. Again, because racism in itself individually is one thing, but the whole system is affected by it, and everyone is affected by it. That's why this is a moral fusion movement. Racism not only affects people of color, it also affects white people too. There are more white people in this nation that are poor in the raw number than there are of any other race or ethnicity. Then we have ecological devastation and denial of healthcare. There's so many things being done in different, usually low income, usually areas where the majority of residents are poor, people of color, such as the incinerator in Baltimore. All these things, they cause environmental issues, they cause breathing problems, and mold can grow in housing and all this stuff together is affecting the poor. So ecological devastation, more than just climate change itself, is a real issue. And because of all the health problems it causes, denial of healthcare is added on to that because the ecological devastation problems that it caused exacerbate because they can't get the healthcare that's needed. The fourth one is militarism and the war economy. So the military industrial complex began, taking off really right after World War II. And all these funds that get put into the military and put into war and everything, even half of that could be used to end poverty. And the final one is the false moral narrative of religious nationalism. So all the myths that are perpetrated by whether it's right-wing Christian nationalism, or we even have now an issue with Hindu nationalism called Hindutva. In Maryland, our lieutenant governor has ties to that. So it's an issue for any kind of religious nationalism. In Maryland, we've also specified 5 legislative priorities, mainly worked on during session, which is over for Maryland General Assembly, but they're worked on in general by us. So the first one is to establish quality, affordable, stable housing for all. The second is to end Maryland child poverty. So by extending the child tax credit and earned income tax credit. Overall nationwide, over half the children in the country are poor or low income. So, how can politicians ignore half the children? It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. They all claim to care about kids. And when it comes to, women's reproductive rights, some have an issue over women's choice to end the pregnancy because they call it a child. What about all these children that are already here and suffer? Then we have every person, which Maryland General Assembly just made it, passed the legislation, correct, Tom? About, correct, and that's what our priority was for every person. So if you're not a citizen, you're still eligible for health care. But that should be a national priority as well, for our politicians. Set a living wage in Maryland. Right now, the minimum wage is $15. That went up January 1st. And in Montgomery County, it's going up, I think it's $16.70 for large size employers, and I think only $15.50, I think is what it is for medium sized employers. But that's still not enough. And many other states don't have even near that. And the federal minimum wage is just over $7 an hour. Then the final one is to ensure food security for every person. There are too many areas where you can't get food easily just within your neighborhood. You have to go out wherever. If you don't have proper transportation or access to public transportation that works well, it just does not work right. And those food deserts are an issue. Then, of course, there's the cost of food and cutting back on food stamps and SNAP and WIC. It's just doesn't help do anything there. It makes it worse. So during the March 2nd assembly, we had various speakers. About half of them were impacted, people impacted by all these issues, housing and healthcare and racism and all that. So right now we're going to show a brief recap video of that from our videographer from the day, Kid Mix Photography. And the song that's being played is Where is the Love by the Black Eyed Peas. August.
People killing, people dying, children hurt and you hear them crying. And you practice what you preach, and what you turn the other cheek. Father, 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 help us, and some guidance from above. These people got me questioning, where is the love? Where is the love? Where is the love? Where is the love, the love, the love?
Kid Mix Photography.
If you want to see the entire recording of the assembly, you can go to mdppc from MarylandPurpose/March2. The live stream started while we were out marching, so there's a lot of setup going on. So if you go to about the 32-minute mark is where the assembly actually starts. And I want to ask, I think we see a couple people who were at the march on March 2nd. If you were present, is anyone here that was there? All right, thank you very much. We definitely appreciate you attending, and that you are now sworn public abolitionists, as we did swear you in then. So we would definitely need others to join us in that.
It was something. Having that swearing in, everybody was surprised and motivated and empowered and driven to do something good, do something good to help. Oh. Can you hear me now? Okay. Yeah, we empowered a lot of people. A lot of people's stories were heard, including mine. They and Mike's. Because when you give a person their voice back, they go out and they work to make changes. When you tell them that they're the blame for their problem, they are less empowered, they feel inferior, they are depressed, they are like the dry bones that Jesus talked about. And so we are here today to resurrect those dry bones. We want a resurrection, not an insurrection. We are here because we have a heart and we want to, as we mobilize, I want everyone to remember, we unite to register our votes are not to show support, but they are our demands. And mobilize the 1.1 million poor and low wage infrequent voters who make up 21% of the electorate in the state of Maryland. We have 2.174 million poor and low income people in the state of Maryland right now. It is heartbreaking. In order to fundamentally reshape the politics and the economy of this state, we will need to raise up out of the shadows an entire new constituency of citizens and voters. We are asking for 200 individuals who are interested in helping in this cause. From May the 15th, we will have a major training. Reverend Barbara and all of the National Committee, they will be giving 200 individuals who are interested in going out, engaging on the ground, canvassing by flyers, handouts, postcard support, phone and text banking, engagements social media amplification to create a coordinating drumbeat. One band, one sound across the state towards June 29th, our march on Washington, and November to the polls. We're not just having this march just to have a whole lot of people coming from all over this country. They're coming because they need to come. They're coming because their voices are not heard. And there are some who we call the sleeping giant. There was a study that was done, and it's a powerful study. Powerful study. I can't go into it all today. But this report demonstrated that if poor and low-income workers, over 85 million, they voted the same way as people with higher income. The report proves the biggest opportunity to build a moral agenda, and that lists from the bottom among poor and low-wage voters, that they would change the trajectory of this election and the ongoing elections, because they would be the 21% electorates. I'm sorry. So we want to wake up the sleeping giant. We want to engage you all and ask you all to do what you can. Because if you don't think I'm not doing enough, Yes, you are doing enough. Something is enough. Pushing a button and passing it to another person, talking to your neighbor, handing a flyer out, doing anything to make a difference, because poverty is outrageous. People are hungry. People are still, have been 300,000 people were taken off of Medicare in the March of 2024. 300,000 people were disenrolled. What are they gonna do? They're gonna die, because 800 people die a day in the United States of poverty. It's the fourth leading cause of death. And I know some people who had this, who have died from this. And it's just tragic. They were one step away from a disaster, could not get the help that they needed. And it was a spiral decline. And they're gone. So we are asking you all to take up the mantle. We know a lot of you are doing a lot of things, but join us in support for the campaign to touch the infrequent voter, encourage that infrequent voter, because their votes affect their zip codes. Your votes, your zip codes, all of this goes together. It's all tied together. Voting is critical for the poor and low income worker. Thank you.
Somebody's killing poor people, and it's going on. Yeah.
When COVID happened, poor people were dying to a funeral every single day. It would take you 600 years.
What they're about to show is a promo video for the June 29th Assembly.
Somebody's killing poor people, and it's going on. Yeah.
When COVID happened, poor people were dying at a rate already of 800 people a day. Before COVID, if you went to a funeral every single day, it would take you 600 years to attend all the funerals of the people who will die from the ravages of policy violence, poverty, and low wages in America in just 1 year. It would take you 2 years and 19 days to go to all of the funerals of the people that will die today, and oftentimes silence. Nobody talks about this political genocide, but we are determined today to remember their death and be a resurrection of voting power and voice power like never before.
Economic justice and saving this democracy are deeply connected. We, as a nation, must listen to the demands of the poor, who are pushing and will continue to push political candidates and elected leaders to lift from the bottom so that everybody can rise.
We are the poor, the marginalized, and the underpaid. And we are taking one step forward to say that everybody has a right to live.
Poverty is not the fault of those who are impoverished. It is caused by those who make the policy.
There are over 135 million poor and low-wage, low-income people in this nation.
The biggest block of potential voters by far is low-income, low-wage voters.
I can't afford medicine. Sometimes I have to skip because of the cost.
The farm worker community is tired of the violence imposed upon us by greed, exclusion, and denial of basic human rights.
Those folk that represented by that casket poor and low-wage workers who are the most moral people in this country because they go to work every day believing, even though going to work is hazardous to their health.
I'm tired of working 70 to 80 hours a week and still not have money for the necessity of bills. I'm tired of getting sick and not being able to go see the doctor. Having to make a choice to pay between rent or the light bill or food or clothes.
You cannot claim to care about families and a culture of life and then do everything in your power to rob people of equal access to resources and to force them to live in poverty.
Leadership of both parties have waged war on poor people and low-wage workers.
And this government has treated people experiencing poverty, including their military families, with disdainful, deliberate, malicious neglect.
So the truth is that my son died from poverty.
We refuse to accept poverty as the fourth leading cause of death.
The fourth leading cause of death in this, the richest country in the world.
We march today for our children and the generations to come.
And we need to do it with the loudest voices possible, the biggest actions possible.
We will voice our demands and register our vote.
When we stand up and when we stand together, things change.
There is the electorate that is, and then there is the electorate that should be.
34 million eligible poor and low-income voters did not vote in 2016. If just 20% of those voters in swing states were mobilized around an agenda, they could change the political outcome of every election. So we're launching the most massive voter mobilization and turnout campaign in history of poor and low-wage voters, allies, and religious leaders.
People are dying, but we know it doesn't have to be this way. And so we are calling on everyone to join us in this Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival.
We are here, we will be seen, we will be heard, and our power will be felt. We don't need to be an insurrection. We are a resurrection that will be felt across this country. Are you ready? 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 We are a resurrection, and we are ready. And we won't be silent anymore.
And you can get this video at mdpbc.org/JUN29 promo. Linnell has more to say now.
Yeah. There's no time for letting up. At this point, we must eradicate poverty and keep the issue of poverty at the forefront of our political discussions at all levels of government, state, local, and national levels, because there are 36.1% of Marylanders who are suffering, and that's sinful and immoral. So we are going to have our questions and answers now.
Yep. We'll have our Q&A now. After that, we will end with how we end everything with the PPC, is by doing a chant that we say 4 together, not 1 step back 3 times, but we'll do that after the Q&A. So we'd like you to stay for that if you can.
I can be the mic. I'll be Vanna. Questions? Oh, okay. Oh, even better. All right. One thing that I will point out that was being discussed about the power of low income, low propensity voters is the margin of victory is so slim in all of the battleground states that just if we could immobilize 1/3 to 1/2 of the people who did not vote in 2016 or 2020, you would have a completely different electoral map. And I think that given the stakes that are involved in this particular election, that's worth consideration.
Yeah, thanks, Tom and Linnell and Mike. I wonder, I appreciate the flyer that's got the 5 priorities, and they're very specific. It's very helpful. And I also note there's a sign on for the petition in the flyer as well. I'm just curious if any of you want to comment on where do those priorities sit in terms of the likelihood of passage or progress in the assembly today? I know we're in primary season, so any pointers you want to give us might be helpful. Thanks.
Well, we already mentioned that the General Assembly passed the healthcare bill that it's now allowing for non-citizens to be able to apply for healthcare. So that was definitely a win there. There were bills on each priority. They're not on this actual document, the flyer, but Tom, do you remember which ones were
Yeah.
passed?
You're on the committee.
Yeah. The problem with the food security was we were trying to really do things to enlarge and widen the availability through WIC and other programs at the state level. And while there was one bill that passed that enabled that changed the criteria and the amount available for elderly, it lowered the age for the elderly to receive assistance. The bills did not pass, or did not, in some cases, did not even get a hearing regarding changing the outcome for enlargement of WIC and other SNAP benefits. So that's something still to be done and to be addressed, particularly in terms of child poverty. Obviously, we would like to have a single payer healthcare system where all could easily have healthcare and affordable healthcare, and that's a long way from realization. What we were trying to get past and did not pass this session was simply to put a study together about what the impact of making that kind of transformation could be for everyone in the state of Maryland. And while we did have some success in terms of the government or the legislature agreeing to Governor Moore's proposal to put more funds into the emergency rental assistance program, it's a Band-Aid program, and it's a drop in the bucket in terms of what's really needed. And Maryland, interestingly, has the highest eviction rate in the country, and highest eviction rate in the country. And we were trying to have legislation passed that would really address that. And unfortunately, again, those pieces of legislation did not pass. So we'll be back at the table and back in working on that next year. I'm on the policy team for Maryland, and so every summer we get together with legislators and who we consider allies to discuss the state of play and what could be done in terms of mobilization in the following session to really help enable action on the priorities that we believe are necessary to, secure changes that we think are beneficial.
Yeah, and the governor offered $2.5 million towards rent support. That's it. 2.5 million.
Not going to go very far.
No.
And I did want to elaborate on two more things to do with the Poor People's Campaign. We are nonpartisan. We don't support specific officials. If we meet with them, we're not supporting them. They're there to listen to us. They might give us information on what's going on bill-wise, but they're there to hear our demands.
Yes.
And it was also nonpartisan because blue, red, yellow, whatever, they're not all there because a particular party values or anything like that. They're there for their own interests a lot of times. So you can't just say all one side is okay. There are people all throughout the government that are not taking the people's demands to heart. And we aren't lobbyists. We support issues. So we can't go in and say, do this with this bill, do this with this bill. We can say these are the bills that really support that go towards our issues, but we want the issues. And the Poor People's Campaign demands are for everything. We want the entire thing. Yeah, we might only get parts passed through state legislatures, but we do want it all, so to speak, So, $15 minimum wage is great, but, a living wage is what's really needed.
Hi, my name's Dylan Grinham. I'm a public high school teacher at Gaithersburg High School. It's a majority minority school and a low-income school. And we have record rates of children not attending school right now. A large part of that is because of poverty. I can't help the students if they don't come to school, and they can't come to school if they're being evicted. Every single year, I have 3 to 5 students out of my 150 who are evicted. And they can't come to school because they don't have a place to go home, and they can't do anything because of this problem. It is huge. And part of the problem with low school attendance is poverty. And we can feed them, but we can't house them. And parents are working 3 to 4 jobs, and they can't respond to emails. They don't have telephones. It is a huge crisis amongst our youth. And poverty is leading to record high rates of mental health problems with our young people. And every day I go to school and there's 10 seats missing in each of my classes. And those 10 seats gone are all victims of poverty. We're at 55% of public school children who live below the poverty line, and breakfast and lunch aren't enough. And it is a real crisis. And we have people running for the school board who are Christian nationalists. And it is so important for Montgomery County voters to vote the Apple ballot, because those candidates are approved by the union, and they want to fight poverty in our public schools. They want to get kids back in the building. And when you don't do your research, even for local campaigns, you are not participating in the solution. You're participating in the problem. So I would say, as a first line person every day who deals with kids who can't do my work because they can't get in the building, because they are hungry and they don't know where they're going to sleep that night, please vote even at the local level for Apple ballot candidates. They're vetted and they really care about poverty in Montgomery County.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Penny.
Hi, my name is Penny Winder, and I have a question. So all of the 5 initiatives that you're working and asking for are perfect. However, they take a long time. What the immediate issue to me is getting out the vote that you talked about. And so what can we, as a faith community here, who are pretty active in writing postcards for other states, what do we do here today? What do you want from us today as a group that we can help you get out the vote?
I think you can volunteer to be part of the 200 that we're seeking to touch all of the low wealth, low propensity voters in Maryland.
And how do you do that?
We're going to be doing that through every means possible. And we will be offering trainings through the latter part of May and early June leading into the March that will give you the tools and resources and the instruction about how we're going to proceed as a campaign to do this.
You can also sign up today on our JOT form at the end of this session.
And if you, Tom, if you send me that information, I'll circulate it to the Faith in Action email list.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Sharon, I saw you.
Yes.
Yeah, we have cards for you all to sign up if you're willing to be volunteers. What we're trying to do is, you're going to have to help me on the math, the formula that Reverend Barber laid out. Okay, but I think basically what we wanted to do is have people, the 200, touching, 20 to 30 people. I forget what the
end of the.
Yeah, anyway, long story short is we're trying to reach 15 million people across the country in the space of 8 weeks to try to mobilize them for the November election. And obviously the subset of that is the folks in Maryland. And we'll have, we'll be getting information obviously from a variety of sources about identifying who some of those voters are so that we can, specifically reach out to them, as you particularly do with a postcard campaign in general. But we believe that, one methodology is not enough, obviously. And we're trying to make sure that we're using all the methods available to reach voters.
Because in 2022, we reached 5.1 million folks across the nation.
And that was a
campaign.
And that was a dry run basically for what
so we know we
try
can do it.
We
know we can do it. Each state brought 30,000 people to the March on Washington in 2020 too. I was one of those state campaign organizers, and it can be done. We have a method. Yes.
I do want to speak to one point you made in the beginning, how these are all long-term. But that's the thing about the Poor People's Campaign. We're doing things for the long haul. We're not just about quick actions to keep doing these little smaller actions, although they're all piecemeal to it. We are doing this movement for the long haul.
Yeah,
He had a question.
I'm Mary. I just have a small specific question that builds on what we've been saying about like getting out the vote. I'm just thinking about, you know, how you talk about capturing the voices of not just all of us but the poor people that have had a hard time voting and getting access, and really what are the strategies that you found seem to work best to really reach people that are living really difficult lives and help them, their voices be heard through the vote.
We're going to have a, with the Get Out the Vote, we're going to have a training May the 15th. And that initiative will set the tone and set the parameters as to how they want to, the national wants us to mobilize. We have methods here because a lot of us have been judges. A lot of us are certified registering people to vote. That is still going to go on. But what we are targeting at this time are infrequent voters. And that's why we're going to have this training, because it's very important and it's going to be strategically taught to us, or, you know, giving us additional information as to how to get these particular individuals in our areas. And you can go to the election and the board, and they will give you the infrequent voters in your counties. That's very easy to do.
And to answer your question a little bit in another way, I think the true import of our movement is we do center the voices of the poor and low wealth and marginalized people in this country. And we do that by listening to them and basically engaging in conversation. I did text banking for the Poor People's Campaign in the 2020 election. And basically it was interesting and amazing that a lot of people would respond to my text by kind of talking about their specific situation. And then I was able to respond to them in kind. And I think that's really the basis of, you know, that kind of mobilization is really neighbor to neighbor, person to person. And what we're going to try to do is use all the methods available to us to achieve on that level.
And just another thing that we're going to do in general, not necessarily just for Get Out the Vote, is on social media. We do want to try to get testimonies from these poor and low income impacted people to post on social media, get their words out individually too.
My name is Nancy, and I just have a piece of information, I think, for others. I have been reading the recent biography of by Doris Kearns Goodwin, and it is called An Unfinished Love Story. And it's the story about how she and her husband, he was the key speechwriter for Lyndon Johnson through all of this, and how Johnson was trying so hard to have this be his priority of his entire service to the country as president. But of course, the Vietnam War got involved. But the background on all that, on how he and Martin Luther King finally came together and then split over the Vietnam War, is just quite fascinating. The politics of it, the history of it. As somebody who lived through the 60s myself, and you know, all the campaigns then, it's really re-inspiring, and I commend it to all of you. Very well written as usual.
Thank you.
So the two sides, so one is getting out the vote, which is clearly necessary. The other is for a voter to know which candidate to vote for. And one thing that seems to have happened in at least national level and probably state level, not so much local, is that candidates don't want to talk about the things that matter. Instead, they want to talk about hot button social issues, which some of them are real, but they aren't at the heart of a lot of the problems. And is there any, any suggestions for how to get candidates to talk about stuff that matters?
I just want to say that's a great thing to bring up because the Poor People's Campaign, we want to get poverty into the political discourse for candidates because not one single major candidate, and probably no candidates at all, at least national candidates, have had poverty in discussion this year. And in 2020, I think it was when we had the Congress and there's like 8 candidates for president were invited there. They came there, but poverty didn't continue to stay into this discourse.
Just one other thing, if for somebody who, you know, remembered 1968 and a lot of other stuff, and as already an adult, one of the hazards is you kind of think, oh yeah, so that was done then, that was solved. And of course, that's not true.
No.
And I recently read a book, which many of you may have already read, which is a real kick in the teeth if you need one. It's called Poverty by America, and the author is Matthew Desmond. And I'm not an economist, so I don't know how sound his arguments are economically, but it's a real wake up.
It is.
It is. And I think one of the things that we try to do is bring these issues to the fore whenever there are candidate forums by showing up ourselves and just raising the issues and making clear that we have specific concerns that need to be addressed. And I think to Carl, in a certain sense, and when we have the conversations with low wealth voters, we try to connect their particular voice raising those issues. Their vote is that mechanism, and we try to make that connection so it's real and visible and gives them a reason to come to the polls. I mean, it's hard to overstate the level of machination that's going on with regard to voter suppression across the country, and Maryland's not immune from that. You know, there were what I would consider voter suppression bills introduced in the last session. Happily, they didn't pass, but the fact that they were simply being introduced as mechanisms is concerning enough in light of what's going on much more egregiously in other states. So I think we have to be persistent and articulate and making the connections visible, both holding politicians to account for what's not happening, as you referenced in Matthew's book, and it makes so abundantly clear. And at the same time, giving people a sense that if they do come to the polls and they do vote, I guess to answer the question, while we're nonpartisan and we don't tell people who to vote for, we make it clear. And what we're trying to do on the policy team is make clear what politicians are supporting and not supporting in relation to our demands. And I think that's the way that we,
we are creating report cards. We don't give them their report cards.
And just one other thing on that topic in general is these infrequent voters that that we're trying to reach. The number one reason when people were polled, number one reason that said that they didn't vote is because they're not being listened to.
Yeah.
And nobody's speaking.
Nobody's speaking to them.
No politicians are talking to them. In the 2020 election, in all of the presidential debates, poverty was never mentioned once as an issue. And I think the fact that people don't hear and don't see politicians speaking to their issues and their needs is a reason why they, are reluctant to come out to vote and fail to do that often. Yes, ma'am.
Chris Files, quick question. Can you define again, we're talking about poor people or low income, how big a population, what percentage are voting, and is that percentage increasing or decreasing in recent years? And if you can refine that also for Maryland, I'd be interested. Thank you.
I'll do my best. 85 million people are low wealth, low wage worker voters that are eligible as a block.
1.1 there.
And roughly 38%, I believe, 34 to 38% did not vote in the last election. Yeah, I mean, I think that they're parallel, but the thing is that this is a huge block of voters that could swing election. I mean, Reverend Barber has gone through very specifically state by state, and there's an excellent report on the poorpeoplescampaign.org website that details all of this. But the margins of victory are so narrow in most of the swing states that if even 10% or 8% of low wealth voters who didn't vote the last time came out, that would shift potentially the election outcome.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, for having us and for your time.
Journey,
Journey.
take your coat off.
If you want to sign up, we do have cards you can fill out.
Come on.
But we're gonna end with our chant now, and Journey's gonna lead us in this. She'll say forward together, you say not one step back, and we'll do it 3 times.
Forward together.
Not one step back.
Forward together.
Not one step back.
Forward together.
Not one step back. Thank you.
Fight poverty, not the poor.
Fight poverty, not the poor.